Hi there, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to take you through what's called a chapter test on our website. So this is where you can pick a certain number of questions from one particular chapter of the Canadian Citizenship Study Guide. And that's a great way to train yourself and test your knowledge on one specific area. Each of the areas cover something unique like elections or Canada's history or modern history. And so if you happen to be weaker in one area, you can touch up your knowledge with these chapter tests. This chapter test happens to be from Chapter 2, or Section 2, which is called Who We Are. So that's not one of the longest sections in the study guide, but it does have a lot of names and dates that you're going to have to memorize. Let's take a look at question 1. Marjorie Turner Bailey is which of the following? Now, none of these answers are dummy answers, so all of these characters, all of these descriptions do actually belong to personages mentioned in the study guide. The first woman to become Governor General, that's Adrienne Clarkson, and she also happens to be the first Asian American to be Governor General. A well-known English pioneer settler, that is not Marjorie Turner Bailey, but there are other well-known English women pioneer settlers that are mentioned in the study guide, such as Mary Ann Carey or Laura Secord. Marjorie Turner Bailey is an Olympic athlete and a descendant of Black loyalists, so that is the correct answer. A member of the group of 7 painters. No, that is Emily Carr. Now, in order to get to the next question, we can click on any of these here to skip around, or we can click on Next to go forward and back. And if you do want to see an answer without waiting to get to the end, we have the option to see answer here. So we'll click on this button, and the correct answer will load in blue bold with a check mark. Let's go on to our next question. What percentage of Aboriginal people are Métis? So Section 2 tells us about 65% of Aboriginal people are First Nations, while 30% are Métis and 4% are Inuit. So the term Aboriginal people in Canada includes those 3 groups, the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit. And our answer is 30%. Let's click Next. Question 3. The Great Upheaval refers to? The answer is the removal of Acadians from their maritime home to Quebec in the 1700s. The study guide tells us that between 1755 and 1763, during the war between Britain and France, more than 2/3 of the Acadians were deported from their homeland. Despite this ordeal, known as the Great Upheaval, the Acadians survived and maintained their unique identity. So let's take a look at the rest of these answers. The removal of Aboriginal peoples from their homes between the 1740s and the 1860s. Well, that started a lot earlier and continued a lot later than that. So that is not correct. The Métis were not deported from farmland in Quebec in the 1870s. We had the Northwest Rebellion in the late 1860s and through the 1870s. Louis Riel, Gabriel Dumont. The removal of Acadians is the correct answer. The deportation of more than 2/3. My apologies, this is the correct answer. And the reason is, the Acadians were not deported to Quebec. They were just kicked out, and they basically went south. So a lot of them ended up as far south as Louisiana. They are widespread, settling in different places, but the major settlements ended up down in the United States. So they were not removed and transplanted to Quebec. The deportation of more than 2/3 of Acadians from their home between 1755 and 1763. So you have to read the wording pretty carefully. Let's click on See Answer. And let's go on to the next question. We'll click on Next. The 1930s Governor General John Buchan proposed which of the following views on immigration? So all of these are overt or covert items that we've seen in Canada and immigration. So closed door policy. Once, for example, Chinese immigrants had finished the railroad, Canadians didn't want any more Chinese immigrants, and so they closed the door to the Chinese by implementing a head tax. Open door policy. We have never had an open door policy. Multiculturalism is not an immigration policy. It's one of the characteristics of Canadian culture. Our answer is unity in diversity. And we know this from Section 2. John Buchan was the first Baron Tweedsmuir, a popular Governor-General of Canada between 1934 and 1940. Immigrant groups, he said, should retain their individuality and each make its contribution to the national character. Each could learn from the other, and while they cherish their own special loyalties and traditions, they cherish not less that new loyalty and tradition which springs from their union. Let's move on. The Royal Proclamation of 1763 by King George first guaranteed. Our answer is A, Aboriginal territorial rights. The guide tells us that territorial rights were first guaranteed through the Royal Proclamation of 1763 by King George III and established the basis for negotiating treaties with the newcomers, treaties that were not always fully respected. Back to our test. Equal protection under the law for Aboriginal peoples. I don't know if they still even have this, to be honest. Multiculturalism rights for Aboriginal peoples and protection for the human rights of Aboriginal peoples. Canada is sorely lacking in providing all three of these to Aboriginal people. Let's go on. Canadian institutions uphold which of the following beliefs? Okay, now, all of these look decent, don't they? They all look like good ideas. So none of these is a dummy answer. You're going to have to read this pretty carefully and be able to reference that part of the guide in your head at a moment's notice. So our answer here is peace, order, and good government. Section 2 of the guide tells us that our institutions uphold a commitment to peace, order, and good government, a key phrase in Canada's original Constitution document in 1867, the British North America Act. This one, for example, here, are rights that are guaranteed us in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. These are American terms, so if you've been watching too much American TV, you might get confused. But freedom, liberty, and the pursuit of individual happiness, these are American goals. And of course, this one is stuck in here to confuse, because it sounds pretty good. Let's move on to our next question. Acadians are descended from which peoples? The First Nations and French who settled in Ontario and Quebec, French colonists who settled in maritime provinces, British and French colonists who settled in maritime provinces, and First Nations and English settlers who made their home in Ontario and Quebec. The guide tells us that the Acadians are the descendants of French colonists who began settling in what are now the maritime provinces in 1604. So the descendants of First Nations and French are Métis, in case that's the one that confused you the most. So our correct answer is going to be this one here, French colonists who settled in the maritime provinces. Let's go on. Question 8 of 20. Which are 3 beliefs that enabled Canadians to build a prosperous society in a rugged environment? Okay, all of these sound pretty good. So you're going to need to be able to pull up that bit of the guide in your head to understand which are the rights, which are the responsibilities, etc. So the guide tells us that a belief in ordered liberty, hard work, and fair play have enabled Canadians to build a prosperous society in a rugged environment, from our Atlantic shores to the Pacific Ocean and to the Arctic Circle, so much so that poets and songwriters have hailed Canada as the Great Dominion. Our answer is the first one, hard work, fair play, and ordered liberty. Now all of these do sound good, so that's why you need to understand this one portion of the text. And that's why these practice questions are so useful, because once you've done this, you are not likely to forget it. Let's move on to question 9. What is the key phrase that sums up Canada in the original Constitution document? So we just mentioned this a moment ago. And this is an example of how bits of knowledge can cross-reference on various kinds of questions to help you out when you're doing a test. The key phrase from the British North America Act of 1867 is peace, order, and good government, and our institutions uphold a commitment to these. Let's move on to our next question, number 10. We're halfway through. Inuit means First Nations of the North, the people, or the first people. So all of these look like pretty good answers. So you have to memorize this one little fact. The answer is the people. And the study guide tells us the Inuit, which means the people in the Inuktitut language, live in small scattered communities across the Arctic. Okay, let's move on to question 11. Aboriginal and treaty rights are protected by which of the following? The British North America Act, the Constitution, the Confederation Act, and the Treaties Act. So all of these look pretty good. If you're not familiar with this particular clause of the study guide, you have absolutely no clue as to which one is the correct answer. The study guide tells us that Aboriginal and treaty rights are in the Canadian Constitution. Let's check our answer. And let's move on to the next question.